Welcome to Global Tax Talk. I'm Stewart, Brant, and today we're joined by Akhilesh Ranjan, based out of Delhi, India. Welcome, Akhilesh.
Thank you, Stewart. Good to be here speaking with you.
Today we'll be talking about the UN and developments around its tax work. The UN has historically worked on tax issues through its committee of experts, with important outputs like the UN Model Double Tax Convention, the UN Practical Manual on Transfer Pricing for developing countries. But they've struggled to make a significant impact because they're not a government body and they lack resources. In December of 2022, the African group proposed strengthening the UN's tax role, effectively challenging the OECD's dominance. This prompted a report by the UN Secretary General exploring ways for the UN to enhance its role in international tax cooperation. A year later, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution calling for a legally binding framework convention on international tax cooperation. This was one of the Secretary General's proposed options from its report. So what is a framework convention? It's an umbrella document containing high-level political commitments concerning its general objectives, procedural rules, and institutional arrangements, which includes governance structure. The detailed and substantive rules and obligations are added over time through a separate agreements called protocols. The UN recently concluded its organizational session for negotiating the Framework Convention. Akhilesh, with this backdrop, what is the current state of play? What were some of the key decisions from that organizational meeting?
So the agenda of the organizational session which was held earlier this month was primarily to take decisions on how the committee is going to function. It was decided to have a bureau with a chair elected, and who was elected to be from Egypt. Mr. Rami Yusuf will be the chair. He was also the chair of the ad hoc committee. The rapporteur is Chile, and there are 17 vice chairs elected to the bureau, representing countries from across the world, from different regions, elected on the basis of a proportionate representation. The major decision on the decision-making process, which is the most contentious point here, involved a choice between the consensus-based approach and the majority-based approach. It was generally agreed, I think, in the discussions, and there was a lot of discussion on this subject. It was recognized that countries should make all possible efforts to reach consensus in good faith on all the issues in the Framework Convention or the protocol. But the decision finally taken was that the Framework Convention will be decided by a simple majority, with a 2/3 majority required for the protocols. On the second subject, for priority protocol, there was a choice from 4 topics which had been identified in the TOR. The committee opted for the prevention and resolution of tax disputes, which is a topic which I think most countries have welcomed and would be willing to engage in discussions.
Thanks, Akhilesh. So dispute prevention and resolution, as you mentioned, was chosen as the subject of the second priority protocol. And we know that the committee had already agreed that 2 protocols would be negotiated simultaneously with the Framework Convention. So can you help explain what the subject of that other priority protocol is, and can you describe its significance?
The first protocol was on, the first subject of the early protocol was on the taxation of cross-border services in a digitalized and globalized world. Now, this issue, as you're aware, Stewart, has been engaging administrators and policymakers from across the world for a very long time. The UN Tax Committee has been working on it. Articles 12A dealing with technical services, 12B dealing with automated digital services have already become part of the UN framework, UN Model Convention. The UN Tax Committee is continuing to work on the something called the Article XX, which addresses services, a combination of technical and professional and other services. The OECD has been engaged in discussions on this. The Pillar 1, in fact, although it does not specifically address services, the solution that arrived at does address services in a way. Then there have been unilateral measures. Several countries across the world enacting things like the digital service taxes, the equalization levies. Many countries coming up with different rules of nexus, like the significant economic presence. A lot of such efforts and measures being taken by different countries in different forms and different manners. But then in all these measures and all these efforts, well, it has not been possible to find a comprehensive solution to the taxation of services which could be appropriate and which could be accepted, which could be found acceptable by a large number of countries. And so it's a welcome move that this committee is going to take up this subject on priority. How the committee will go about it is not clear. All options are open. The committee could try and define new nexus rules and new profit allocation rules in a manner which is less complex and more easily implementable than the Pillar 1 solution. They could focus on specific services which digital services which involve a lot of user contributions, user data and information adding value to those services. Or there could be a framework where there is an exchange of information and mutual administrative assistance which can help countries develop their own capacity to deal with these issues. So options are open. The committee will, of course, have to tread carefully and try and find a solution which is acceptable to all. Many developing countries are of the view that they would like to have a uniform and a harmonized system of digital service taxes, which are easily implementable and the taxes can be easily collected through withholding mechanisms. But at the same time, I think these countries are willing to consider solutions based on a net basis taxation, as long as the solution is something which they can administer, something which they can implement easily. So the field is open, and let's see what the committee really does on this matter.
This protocol in particular is one that we're going to have to pay close attention to. It does sound like, though, however, that there's a number of paths or options that could be at the table here. Akhilesh, where do individual countries stand on the outcomes of the organizational session?
Well, the US has pulled out of the negotiations, and that was only to be expected. We are aware of the string of decisions taken by President Trump on taking over as the president. It is now clear that the US is not really willing to engage with international organizations like the UN or the OECD in tax matters. The US will clearly not be dictated by, as far as tax policy is concerned, they will not be dictated at all by decisions taken in these multilateral organizations. So that was only to be expected. There are a number of other countries who have expressed strong reservations, reservations which are primarily revolving around the decision-making process. Japan and Israel have already dissociated themselves from the decisions taken by this committee in this session. The EU, UK, several other countries like Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Korea, Canada have maintained that they will insist on a consensus-based approach, and they will not agree to decisions which are not taken by consensus. So I think there is a lot of work to be done by the committee as to how and to see how they can find solutions which people can agree upon, and a high level of consensus can be reached. There is a possibility of compromise, as has been noticed now in the choice of the second subject. The prevention and resolution of tax disputes is a subject which was more wanted by the developed economies rather than by the developing countries. Developing countries have, for instance, a lot of reservations on things like arbitration. But then I think there is a strong there is a compromise now possible because they have accepted the second subject as the prevention and resolution of disputes. to find new solutions out there. So there is hope that countries will be able to come together and find acceptable solutions.
Well, it sounds certainly like a mixed bag here, with the topic of decision-making being so far the most controversial issue. What's the process going to look like going forward? How is this going to impact tax administrations and taxpayers?
Yeah, so, well, the committee is going to have 3 substantive sessions every year for the next 3 years, and aim to get the Framework Convention and the protocol ready by the end of 2027. That is a tall order. The tax administrations of different countries will have to allocate sizable resources to these discussions. All these 3 meetings every year will be spread over a number of days, and countries will have to find the resources to send their people and to examine proposals and keep contributing to the level best. The taxpayers, of course, will have to just keep watching and waiting with a lot of uncertainty in the air as to what really is going to happen. It's clear that if the convention is to be accepted by countries, if it has to be something which has to be ratified by those countries, and that ratification by a large number of countries will require a very large majority of countries, including the developed countries, agreeing to the Framework Convention. So, and the protocol, which is even more of a contentious issue, especially the first subject of the protocol. So let's see how it goes. The committee will have to negotiate, and all the skills of the negotiators will be tested to see how they can find a solution which is acceptable to all.
Akhilesh, thank you very much for joining us. This was really insightful. We're going to continue to monitor these developments, and we'll certainly have you back on.
Thank you, Stewart. Pleasure being with you and speaking with you today.
And thank you also for joining us. And come back soon next time on Global Tax Talk so that you are global tax ready.